Welcome to Unbiased Science, where we bring scientific method to the madness. I'm your host and public health scientist, Dr. Jess. And today is something of a special episode. I don't even know where to begin, really. But you know what? Let me not even give the background just yet. I want to introduce today's guest. So today's guest, let me read the bio here. Hang on. Dr. Sarah Ballantyne, who, if it's okay, moving forward, I'll call Sarah. So Dr. Sarah Ballantyne is the founder of Nutrivore.com and New York Times best-selling author of Nutrivore, the radical new science for getting the nutrients you need from the food you eat. She creates educational resources to help people improve their day-to-day diet and lifestyle choices, empowered and informed by the most current evidence-based scientific research. With Nutrivore, Dr. Sarah has created a positive and inclusive approach to dietary guidance based in science and devoid of dogma, using nutrient density and sufficiency as its basic principles. Nourishment, not judgment. Sarah, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for having me. And also allow me to start by expressing my gratitude to you for looking at my current work, for taking that time to dig into it and judging it based on its quality and scientific rigor, rather than the circuitous path I took to get here, which I know we're going to talk about today. But I really appreciate the opportunity to address some of the disinformation that has been spread about me lately, and also talk about Nutrivore and what I'm building.
Thank you for saying that. And honestly, it's something of an emotional episode. Like I honestly, I'm feeling, it's not anxiety. I don't know how to really articulate it, but maybe we could give a little bit of a history, because there are probably some folks listening right now who are like, what's going on? What, they're really setting the stage here for something. So you might have heard Sarah's name mentioned on this podcast. I don't know if it was about a year or two at this point. And it actually wasn't in a positive light, or, it wasn't we weren't exactly praising Sarah. And we were being critical of Sarah, who was previously known as the Paleo mom, and was associated with the AIP, the autoimmune protocol diet. I'm sure it's no secret that we've been critical of diets previously. There's a lot of oversimplification of things. Certain diets are structured in a way where they really vilify certain foods. It leads to a lot of shaming and guilt, potentially disordered eating, food anxiety, and all kinds of bad stuff. But then recently I saw some content, and honestly, I swear I didn't even put two and two together with the name. And it was just really fantastic content on ultra processed foods. And that's something that I've covered previously on the podcast and in recent posts, basically saying that, ultra processed foods in and of themselves should not be demonized. Every now and then we can eat some ultra processed foods. It's more about our patterns, the dietary patterns, and the amount of our diet that comprises these ultra processed foods, right? And there's obviously a lot that gets wrapped up in that. There's access to food deserts, and all kinds of, social determinants of health that could limit people's access to fresh foods. It's just very important. It's not something that you can just oversimplify as all processed foods are bad. So I saw Sarah had some really great content, and I reached out because I was planning a newsletter on this topic. I reached out to Sarah, I reached out to a registered dietitian and a couple of other experts to see, could you weigh in on this newsletter, maybe review it, see if you have anything to add. Am I missing anything? And it was great. Sarah said, sure, let's do it. And the newsletter dropped, and a post on social media dropped. And oh my goodness, I did not see this blowback coming.
No, neither did I. I would have bowed out gracefully had I thought it was going to cause the kerfuffle that it did.
A kerfuffle. That is the perfect word, kerfuffle. And the blowback, because I'm used to getting all kinds of messages criticizing the work, and mainly from those who are skeptical of science. And I've kind
Mhm.
of learned how to really speak to those people, and I've evolved in my own science communication journey to really want to reach those people in particular, the science skeptics. But this time, the call was coming from inside the house. And this blowback, pushback, kerfuffle, it was coming from the science community. And they were saying, basically, how dare you platform someone who peddles misinformation? This was a theme. I mean, there was so much of it. Not that I care about numbers, but I actually lost a ton of followers as a result. I know Sarah, that yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Sarah, I know you were being personally attacked, and honestly, I think that's what really pissed me off. Frankly, is don't come for someone who just gracefully accepted this partnership opportunity, this collaboration. It really bothered me. And Sarah, I have to commend you for handling the whole situation very gracefully.
Thank you.
And we went back and forth. I'm just going to let people know a little bit in the background. It's like, how do we deal with this? We talked about Sarah possibly coming on the pod and having a conversation. And at first we were like, oh, but will that, fan the flames and create more of a problem? But we came to this decision that no, let's talk about this. Let's attack the situation head on. And really, the intent with this podcast is not to stir up any more drama. I really am very impressed with Sarah, and Sarah is going to share the 180 that she's made. And Sarah has very openly and honestly accepted the fact that she maybe previously was putting out misinformation unknowingly, which we're going to talk about, but has come to this, I don't even know, this transformation. And I looking at your content, Sarah. I mean, you've really leaned into the science and evidence, and I don't think that anyone should be written off completely based on things that they've done in their past, especially if they've accepted accountability, have learned from it, and of course corrected. All right, that was long-winded. So Sarah, maybe we can just set the stage a little bit. Let's really get into the thick of it, actually. So you were previously, as I said, associated with the AIP diet. Can you tell us about your journey, how your stance on nutrition has changed so dramatically, the things that you got wrong, and then also maybe in that story, can you share a little bit about how you came to be known as the Paleo Mom and why you're no longer known as the Paleo Mom?
Yeah, I think um, there's nested layers to that question, right? I think the most important place to start is to say that um, by the time you did your podcast episode criticizing the autoimmune protocol, I would have agreed with most of those critiques. I was already building Nutrivore. I was already no longer the leader of the autoimmune protocol community. And I had spent years trying to create content to course correct within that community and address those very common pitfalls. Things that I realize now were a combination of um, being wrong about things. I certainly bought into a lot of the most prevalent misinformation in the wellness community, including really buying into the logical fallacies in terms of how restrictions are rationalized within those communities. But I realized in my efforts to try to bring people back from such a restrictive, fear-based implementation of what was initially intended to have 5 pillars. Right? The AIP was supposed to be sleep, stress management, activity, nutrient density, and then elimination and challenge, the idea of identifying your own trigger foods. And I would certainly, there are definitely some flaws in what were eliminated, but I lost control over the communication, the messaging. And the AIP got distilled and simplified to half of a pillar, to just this very, very restrictive diet. Not everyone, but that became a really big challenge in that community. And I realized that as I was losing my ability to steer this ship, and also other work that I was doing was sort of making me realize how many things that I had gotten wrong, and really made me want to go back to the drawing board and just relearn everything I thought I knew about nutrition. That was a years long process. I decided the best thing I can do here is create something new, is to move into a nutrients focused approach, which is what Nutrivore is, but that kind of lives in that world between diet and anti-diet. There's no food off the table. I get the opportunity to look at my communication missteps and learn from them and communicate the value of a high quality diet outside of dietary restriction in a way that can serve that community that I care so deeply about. I have, depending on whether or not you want to count fibromyalgia, suspected autoimmune, some people don't believe it's an autoimmune disease, 3 or 4 autoimmune conditions myself. I am creating Nutrivore not just to help those people who are afraid of food to be open to information that challenges their core beliefs and hopefully feel comfortable expanding their diets and getting beyond that food fear and that restriction, but also all the similar fear-based, unnecessarily restrictive diets that are popular in the wellness community. And Nutrivore gets to be a bridge for those people, in addition to laying out a very accessible, affordable way to improve diet quality for people who are, feel like a healthy diet is not something that is attainable for them, when absolutely we can make changes to improve that.
All right. So, Sarah, I know you have a PhD. Can you tell us what your PhD is in and maybe a little bit about the research that you've done?
Yeah, I would love to. So I have a PhD in medical biophysics. I have to admit, I was kind of drawn to that department because it was all the words smushed together. My bachelor's degrees, I originally intended on doing biochemistry, and then I switched majors and ended up doing a physics degree, but did my honors thesis in radiology and cancer research and medical physics. So then I wanted to go full medical biophysics, and I ended up in a physiology lab that we were like under the umbrella of medical biophysics because of the technology we were using, but we were doing straight up medical research. So I studied innate immune system dysfunction in the context of critical care units. So I studied systemic inflammatory response syndrome for my PhD, and we were using this really cool technology to measure microcirculatory changes due to immune cells basically damaging the endothelial lining. And then we were manipulating with adenovirus-based gene therapy, manipulating endogenous protective enzymes to see if we could increase their expression to help reduce that inflammation. And then I transitioned from that in my first postdoc, staying in critical care, to acute respiratory distress syndrome. It's just all the same stuff happening, just another organ system, and changed the enzymes that we were manipulating. And then we got to do cell-based gene therapy, which is even cooler than viral-based gene therapy, to manipulate the exposure. I got a paper in Blue Journal out of that research. I was very, very pleased. And so, but part of the transition into physiology was I basically had to teach myself an entire bachelor's degree worth of biology and physiology in order to be able to do the research that I was doing, pass my comprehensives, right, pass my defense. And then I did it all again. So then for my second postdoctoral research fellowship, I switched into cell biology and characterized a tumor suppressor gene involved in colon and breast cancer, and learned basic cell and molecular biology, and was in a cell trafficking lab. They're not trafficking cells. That sounds like they're
Yeah.
trying to make them across the border. It studies how cells move things from one part of the cell to the other and control what goes where, is basically the goal of that. So we were studying like this protein that was important for shuttling proteins to the tight junctions and how they impacted tight junction formation, called endotubin 1.
Okay, you said a lot of things, and I'm not going to lie that I understood maybe 2% of them, but it's very impressive. And I just want to clarify, you did 2 postdocs?
I did 2 postdoctoral research fellowships before I had to take a break. And my first daughter was born in the middle of my first postdoc. And so for a while, I was trying to work part-time. My research was advanced enough that I could get a lot done with just a few hours in the lab each day. Cells are much easier to work with than other models. Um, but yeah, it was sort of like about a year in, especially when I realized that was when I had gestational diabetes in my first pregnancy. So that's when it became pre-diabetes. I probably was borderline diabetic, that I did the thing that I never recommend anyone do, which was not tell my doctor. Don't do that. That's very bad.
Oh my
But
gosh. Sarah.
so I had so much shame. Um, I think that's one of the challenges um, with diet preventable disease is you feel like it's your fault. And
Right.
I was close to 300 pounds. Um, and uh, and I was determined to do something about it. And that was kind of my first steps into, uh, you know, basically trying different diets to lose weight and then deal with other health conditions.
I'm curious. I do want to hear a little bit more about Paleo Mom, how you became
Mm,
labeled as such. And then can you tell us a little bit more about your aha moment,
yes.
when it sort of clicked for you, like maybe this is not the best approach to nutrition?
So I have a background in medical research, and I left academia in large part because I was very sick. I was close to 300 pounds. I had prediabetes, high blood pressure. I had all of the symptoms of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but I wasn't diagnosed for another decade. I had eczema, psoriasis, another autoimmune skin condition called lichen planus, chronic joint pain, which was later diagnosed as fibromyalgia. I had irritable bowel syndrome and acid reflux, asthma, uh, frequent migraines. And I really struggled when my first daughter was born to balance early academic careers where you're kind of expected to work 80, 100-hour weeks, and a colicky child who we later found out had sensory processing disorder, which we didn't know at the time, but was an extra layer of challenge with my physical health and my mental health being poor as a direct result of my physical health. And we then moved. I was very socially isolated in a new city because we followed my husband's also an academic. We followed his job, and all I had in my life was my kids and my symptoms. And I went online one day and basically Googled, you know, egg allergy lichen planus. It was something like that, right? So I think someone had said, oh, sometimes eczema is caused by an egg allergy. And I was like, oh, I wonder if this other, I would get patches in the same area. It kind of felt like the same skin condition. I wonder if it's related. And I landed on Professor Lauren Cordain's original version of the Paleo Diet website. I think that's like 3 versions of his website ago. And he had an article about lectins, which was the major rationalization behind the foods that are avoided on the Paleo Diet, and lichen planus with 3 scientific citations. And it spoke to my training in medical research, and it sounded very logical. It sounded very reasonable that there's these compounds in these foods that are activating my immune system. And after kind of taking some time to, like, I dug in more, I read more, definitely following Professor Cordain's work because I really liked all of these scientific citations. I was going and reading the papers, and it really made sense to me. So I decided, okay, it was August 31st, 2011. Like, I remember the day. I have like an anniversary where I started the paleo diet, and I started it. And within 2 weeks, it was the most magical experience. My acid reflux went away. My irritable bowel syndrome went away. I got to stop taking my asthma medications. I got to stop slathering steroids on my skin. And I can look at that now and recognize, well, I certainly had non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and that was a big factor, I'm sure, in how immediately I felt better. But also, I can look at that and go, well, yeah, there was the foods I was eating that were much more nutritious, a lot more vegetables, a lot more seafood, a lot more like nutrient dense foods that are likely behind that. But at the time, that experience turned me into a zealot. I was sold on the paleo diet being the solution for everything. And so I continued. I was losing weight that I thought I would never be able to lose. I stopped having migraines. It was so impactful to experience what higher quality nutrition can do. And I, like so many people following restrictive diets, fell into that same pitfall of attributing it to the foods I was not eating rather than the foods I was. And because of that, then I was like, okay, well, I now know, I'm learning here that these two skin conditions out of the three that I am challenged with are autoimmune in nature. There's this thing called the autoimmune protocol. It was a list of additional foods to avoid that Professor Cordain had come up with Rob Wolf, who was one of his ex-master students, in order to help Rob's mother, who was dealing with autoimmune issues. And I was like, great, I'm going to try this, right? It's my stepping stone. And I think that's another challenge with restrictive diets is they become stepping stones, not into just disordered eating patterns. I think I learned orthorexia through that experience. Not just into food fear, but into more and more restriction. But I started cutting out these additional foods, and my skin cleared up even more. And I just, because it was so impactful in my own life, I felt the need to share it. I felt like I needed to get my family eating this way. I felt like I needed to tell everyone about it. And being socially isolated, everyone meant the internet. So I decided that I was going to start a website because so much of my identity was wrapped up in motherhood with two very, very young kids. I was like, okay, how about the Paleo Mom? Look, that domain exists, that handle exists on social media. I honestly didn't think about it too hard. And I was just like, great, that'll be my website. I thought it was going to be a hobby. And instead, it found an audience really quickly. And I think it found an audience because, and this is really awful to admit. Um, oh my gosh, I'm going to cry. Um, it found an audience because I could talk the science language, and I could bring what looked like scientific validity to what I now realize is misinformation, and um, it's pseudoscience. I did not see it at the time. I learned this way of thinking from scientists, from doctors who were really prominent voices in the wellness community at the time, and it made sense to me. I I didn't know that I didn't recognize that logical fallacy of thinking of a food uh, in terms of how an isolated compound might impact, a cell or a hormone system, right? Some cell signaling system in the body. That is not reflective of how the whole food affects the whole us. But that was where I was, in part because of the experience of having my health completely transformed by those diet changes, in part because it made sense to me at the time, and I was still learning about nutrition. I was writing about it as I was learning it. And I built an audience because I was that voice of science that made things make sense scientifically. Um, and there were a lot of things, not everything. I had lots of things right. Like, I mean, I wasn't all wrong about everything, but there
Right.
were a lot of things that I was wrong about in that time. And it's one of the reasons why I feel such a debt to that audience now. So you asked, like, what was my aha moment? I don't think there was one, but in 2014, my publisher at the time pitched me, hey, can you write a gut health book? Gut health is really trendy right now. And I was like, sure, yeah, gut health is fascinating. I'll go write a gut health book. And I decided, as I was like starting to do some reading and research, right? Like as a science communicator does, right? We do our research, we learn what we can, and then we try to communicate it to the general public. I was like, okay, well, the really interesting thing here is the gut microbiome. Like that's really, when we're talking about gut health, that's actually, I don't want to write about leaky gut. That's not a real thing. I want to write about the gut microbiome. And I spent 6 years, almost 7 years, researching, reading, I don't know, 6,000 papers about the gut microbiome and the many different external factors that influence its composition. And I kept hitting foods that are extraordinarily beneficial for gut microbiome composition. They feed diversity, they feed probiotic species that I was not eating. And I kept hitting them again and again and again. I'm like, I think maybe all of the paleo community is wrong about lentils right here. Like this is so strong. There's so much data to support the benefits of legumes for the gut microbiome. And at the same time, as I sort of mentioned, I was, every time I would say, hey, maybe lentils, actually, it started with green beans. Hey, maybe green beans would be good. I would get pushback. And so I started thinking about rebranding 2015, 2016. In early 2018, that's when I was like, all right, it's time to build something new. Nutrivore was a term that I really resonated with because I was really nerding out about the impact of nutrients on biological systems. That felt like the piece that was missing to me. I was starting to look at my experience through the lens of, oh, but what was I adding to my diet that was actually supplying me with nutrients, that was actually why I was feeling better. I was starting to make that mindset shift. And and it was sort of like this like cool thing that was percolating in the background through 2018 and 2019. And then the pandemic hit in early 2020. I was wrapping up my gut microbiome book, and the publisher said, actually, we can't fit it into our schedule. So sorry, good luck with everything.
Oh my gosh.
2 weeks before everything shut down. And I just found myself at this really interesting point where who I thought of as my colleagues and my friends were leaning into anti-science conspiracy theories. And I had just spent these years researching foods, right? This gut microbiome book was not going to be a paleo book. It was not going to be an AIP book. It was going to be somewhere in, diet neutral. And it was just going to talk about things that impact the composition of the gut microbiome positively.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found myself then that year doing, I co-hosted a podcast called The Whole View. And we did at least a dozen episodes on how masks work, and every time there was a new variant, like, what do we know about this variant? And then we did a whole series on the mRNA vaccines and how that technology works, and then we did a whole series on the adenovirus vaccine and how that technology works. I actually did adenovirus-based gene therapy in grad school, so I was like, oh, I got this one. I know this stuff really, really well. And that kind of took over everything. So it was all consuming. I'm sure you can relate. I was spending 40 to 50 hours researching for one episode. We had to like specifically plan like fluffy episodes in between because there wasn't enough hours in between episodes to actually fully prepare the next episode. And I think that was probably, if there's anything that is an aha moment, it was the moment where I realized that I had been on this journey of uh, realizing that I had been wrong about many things, realizing that I had been spreading misinformation, and wanting to start like helping people see that, right? Like, can I show you this research? Can I show you how we as a community are wrong? And then seeing that the community didn't want to see the research, didn't want to engage with that science. So I kind of did this, like, I don't know. I feel like it was a little bit like turning around to swim upstream. Um, in a lot of ways, I lost my community in that experience. Um, but I also felt a moral imperative, I guess is the best way to say it. I felt like, you know, my everything that I got wrong in the past, I got wrong earnestly. It was from wanting to help people. That desire to help people has never waned. And if anything, I feel like it's even more important now because I have to correct what I got wrong in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So it has informed how I'm building Nutrivore as a dietary philosophy and not a diet, as permissive and not restrictive, how I communicate it to help people feel like they're in a safe space to learn things that contradict what someone else has told them. But then also, it's why the level of scientific rigor behind everything I do is so high. It's why I most often quote meta analyses or umbrella reviews, like if those exist, because I want to not. I never want to be in that situation again if I can avoid it. If I find
Mm-hmm.
myself in that situation, I will admit that I'm wrong and I'll deal with it. But I never want to be in that situation where I have to tell a million people online, sorry, I was wrong.
So, I mean, oh my goodness, there's so much here. I have
Yeah.
like a million questions for
Yes.
you. But first and foremost, I just really want to thank you for your honesty, for your vulnerability. And I think it's clear to me, I know it's clear to me that your intentions were good. And more than that, I think that you were drawn to this because of your own vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
These chronic illnesses that you were dealing with. And I could think of, there's one person in my life, a loved one close to me, who was recently, about a year ago, diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And it just completely rocked her world. It turned her life upside down. And she was someone, or she is someone, who has always kind of naturally gravitated towards sort of what I'd call the fringe, like,
Yeah.
homeopathy, naturopathy, some of those things that had a lot to do with her upbringing. And she, I remember she said to me, and I couldn't believe it, that she was doing the AIP, and she was cutting out, it was the big emphasis, it was cutting out like nightshade, vegetable. There was a whole list
Yeah.
of things that she had to cut out. And then recently she came to me and she said, "Oh my gosh, I just like saw the light." And I realized, because she was doing those things and then she was turning away from the conventional medicine and
Yeah.
not taking the medication that she really needed. I believe it's a Graves' disease that she was diagnosed with. And, her endocrinologist was strongly recommending a certain regimen of medications, and she was turning it down. And she said, "Oh my gosh, I just suddenly realized I really just," she said, "yeah, I drank the Kool-Aid, and I really like bought into this because I wanted so badly for there to be a solution to what I was experiencing." And she's someone who is skeptical of science and medicine. And if there was a way to manage her new diagnosis without turning to those things, she really wanted to. But unfortunately, her medical situation got worse, and she realized that the AIP was not helping her, and she instead took the medications and is now doing really well. But I'm also thinking about, we did an episode, I guess again, now it's been about a year or two, with a naturopath, Britt. Hermes, I think I'm saying her name correctly, who she was I should say a former naturopath. She was hardcore, she had her ND, I forget, naturopathic doctor degree. She was all deep in that world. And then she's completely, like you, done a 180. And now, honestly, her life's mission is dedicated to informing people about the dangers and the harms of naturopathy. And I'm just thinking about that. I mean, there are a lot of parallels here, and I think it's very powerful when you actually can admit, okay, I got it wrong, and I've turned it around. And Sarah, I'm thinking about, my goodness, your audience must have really, at least some of them, must have really reacted. I don't know how to say, strongly to the shift.
Yeah, I think that the majority of my audience has followed me along this journey. And they, in part because my whole, that whole transition played out in public, because I was writing articles the whole time. So you can see the seeds of that transition back in articles that I was writing in 2013, 2014. You can see the efforts that I was making to tell people medication is not failure. We don't want to issue conventional medicine. We want to use all of the tools at our disposal. We don't want to be eliminating foods forever. We want to be reintroducing them. We want to be focusing on nutrient density and making sure we're getting a diverse diet, even within this restrictive protocol. We want to be addressing other things, and we want to understand that there are factors that in fact influence our health that are beyond our control, that you can't AIP harder. It's not that's unfortunately the healthism that that message that really got pulled through AIP in a way that again, it was not messages that I was putting out, but it was in part because that community developed very grassroots. And so there were a lot of different voices in that community. And so it kind of means that there was no central messaging, which is why, again, it could get distilled to this very restrictive, here's all the things you cut out, and just kind of lose that more, for lack of a better term, sort of holistic approach that would then include also, and if your doctor says, here's the medication you need, or whatever, the surgical treatment or whatever other intervention.
Right.
And I think one of the things that for my audience has really resonated is the fact that I have been open and honest through this entire transition. There was never a moment where I was learning and starting to think that I was wrong and that I held that in. My audience, who were following me carefully, saw all of those different steps. And so I think it was really easy for those people to follow along. And actually, I think they're the ones who have kind of been around for all of those different steps, I think appreciate the content that I'm putting out now even more, because they know about my journey to get there.
Right.
But there was definitely people who felt disenfranchised. There were definitely people who felt like they lost their advocate or their the parasocial relationship where you really feel like, oh, that person gets me even though we've never met. I think they felt like they lost that person. And I just feel compassion for those people, right? They lost the person that they thought understood them, that had gone through something similar, that they could really resonate with online. And I'm still here for them.
Right.
I'm still here when they're in a different place and they're ready to start engaging with that information. But it's one of the reasons that also when I create content, it's with all of this in mind, right? So here's the level of scientific rigor I need to make sure that I don't accidentally spread misinformation again, because that didn't feel good. Don't want to do that. And here's the way to communicate it. I'm not talking as necessarily to the people who already have really high levels of epistemic certainty. They already know where to get quality information. They can already identify diet misinformation online. Like, sure, I've got cool stuff for them. Like, there's science is huge. There's so much to know. There's not enough science communicators out there bridging the gap between researchers that are cloistered in the lab and the average person. That's the job that I want to do. So I still have stuff for them, but I'm actually more creating my content for the people who, like me, went, yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah, I cut out that food and I did feel a lot better. And it's really hard when you've had that experience to dig out of that confirmation bias bubble of safety, where you really only want to engage with information that makes sense with your lived experience.
Yep.
And so being able to share my lived experience, that I actually, in all of that, I had to address my own eating disorder. There was a lot of therapy involved. And I had to address my own food fears and work on expanding my diet and really figuring out, okay, out of all of these foods I've cut out, what is actually necessary? Oh yeah, okay, gluten sensitivity, got it. That was the only thing probably this whole time I actually had to cut out. Well, now I know. And so I think that because of that professional journey, at least I hope it allows me to communicate, here's this cool thing about, zucchini that you might not be eating because you've heard that the seeds have lectins. Here's a really cool nutrient it has, like a really cool lignin polyphenols, right? And then and here's how much other nutrients it has, and it brings people in.
No, I'm sorry. No, this is so interesting because one of the things, I'm just going to go there. I'm just going to throw it out there. But there was a post recently, I think it was about cucumbers, maybe. And you chuckling because you already know. And I forget exactly what you called something out in a positive way about something that was in cucumbers. And I will say, just totally transparently, I mean, first of all, this was sent to me as a criticism of you, because how could you platform someone who is touting these benefits of cucumbers and da-da-da? And I mean, what you were saying was accurate, right? There was this, and you'll have to tell me what the
It was lignin. I think I'm pretty sure it was lignin polyphenols. Yeah.
That's what I thought. And anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I am someone who often says, the dose makes the poison, but the dose also makes the benefit. So, I don't know how many cucumbers you'd need to see to get a therapeutic benefit, whatever it is.
Sure.
With the context that you just said. So it's so important. You're now trying to educate people about the benefits of this. What is it? A vegetable, right? It's a cucumber. It has seeds. Is it it's still a vegetable? Okay.
A vegetable.
Called a vegetable that maybe has been vilified based on certain diets, and you're trying to reach those people. See, that is so important, and that context is something I didn't have, and I'm so glad that you shared that, Sarah. So thank you. Sorry, were you going to say something?
I was going to say, just very specifically to that post, because we had a whole conversation about it over here about, okay, 500 characters is not a lot to communicate nuance. And so here's where, okay, no, I think this criticism is valid, that if you are just seeing this one post and we're kind of steeped into the content I create, it does kind of look like I'm trying to pitch cucumbers as a miracle food. So where can we give and take? So we're going to have to lose some of the information because we only have 500 characters in order to add a statement just saying, this is about ditching our fear of cucumber, not about cucumber being a miracle food. And so I'm always trying to refine my communication strategy, because to me, I'm trying to build Nutrivore as a way to get beyond moral judgments of foods. Right? Moral judgments of foods leads to moral judgments of ourselves when we eat those foods, and that propels healthism, because you're then a good person if you have good health because you deserve it because you ate the good foods. And that means you can judge others for their bad health because they must be bad people for eating those bad foods. And so I think it's really important to understand what a healthy diet looks like outside of moral judgments of foods. And one of the challenges is it's really easy to stop calling foods bad foods. That's actually really easy. It's really hard to do that without calling foods good foods. Mm-hmm. But if you have good foods, then you kind of necessarily have the opposite. The opposite has to exist. And it is a communication challenge that I'm still trying to work through exactly how to do that, especially for, like, again, I think my followers who are paying attention, they get it. They see that big picture. But the social media algorithms don't show everything to every person, right? So every post then also has to work as a standalone and still be able to communicate that. So it's a challenge with the way social media algorithms work. It's a challenge with sometimes the limits of how much you can communicate, especially with attention spans. But
This resonates so deeply. I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but first of all, thanks for being receptive. And like, it's a constructed, I don't even know if I'd call it criticism. It's just an open conversation. And the fact that you're open and, hearing me. And by the way, I also learning and figuring out how to effectively communicate science. And it's interesting that you say what you're saying, because, a lot of times I'll post about the benefits of vaccines, and I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But, then I get pushback from people. Well, why are you only talking about vaccines? Why aren't we talking about other ways to keep healthy? And so I hear you. It's like, in my mind, I'm picturing the totality of my content. I am talking about all these other things, but this one person sees this one post as a standalone. And it's like, okay, well, she's saying I can go out and do anything I want, but if I get a vaccine, I'll be safe. So I get it, and it resonates. So Sarah, I got a lot of messages from people saying, how could you platform a person who is X? And I'm going to fill in the blank in a moment, because there were several different things that you got labeled as being. So I'm hoping you can clear the air. Maybe we could do
would love to.
Perfect. All right, let's start things off. Sarah, are you anti-vaccine?
No, never have been.
Okay. Are you anti-GMO?
No, never have been. Did pro-GMO content back when that was not well received by my audience. At least my pro-vaccine content by that time was well received. At least there was that.
Are you anti-masking?
No.
Okay.
No, in fact, I still wear one.
Are you anti-conventionally grown produce?
No, but I will admit that is a place where I have changed. I had really was like, oh yeah, environmental working group makes all the sense to me in my, I'm not even going to look into it very deeply brain of 2014. So that is one place where I have changed. But no, I don't buy organic unless it happens to look way better in the store now.
That's what I say. And then the last question, is there anything that you feel that all people should eliminate from their diet altogether?
No, nothing. Not a single thing. I mean, as individuals, don't eat foods you're allergic to. Right? Exactly. Don't eat foods you hate. Don't eat foods you can't afford. Don't eat foods that have gone bad. And don't eat foods that are calling you names in the schoolyard.
Love it. All right. Now I want to shift gears, and I really want to talk about Nutrivore. And just I will get this question, so let me just address it. This is not sponsored. Sarah did not pay me to say any of these things or to even come on this podcast or none of that. I'm not getting any kickbacks from books or anything like that. I will say Sarah did share of an electronic copy of the book, which I had the pleasure of reading. I think it's incredible. It is absolutely true to the science and the evidence. It did not feel judgmental. It did not feel like anything was being vilified. There was nuance. It was incredible. So I'd love to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit. What is Nutrivore? And then we have to talk about your website, which literally blew my mind, but we're going to get there in a second.
Okay. So Nutrivore is just the goal of getting all of the nutrients our bodies need from the foods we eat. Like that is all it is. But I think that where the nuance comes in is that most people have a really hard time doing that intuitively because of the messaging from fad diets and diet culture and the weight loss industry for decades. Right now we're talking about generations of people who now were so confused about what food is a healthy food. So Nutrivore is also about laying that sort of broad general nutritional sciences education that we don't get in school. Like if you think about how much grammar we know by the time we graduate high school, how much math we know. I mean, even if we just took algebra, If we could have that level of base information about what nutrients do in the body and what types of foods have what types of nutrients, I think that would actually really change the landscape. It would make a lot more people less susceptible to diet misinformation. So Nutrivore is as much about sort of providing that knowledge base to help people choose more nutrient dense foods while acknowledging limitations in access, limitations in affordability, other challenges, right? So people who have strong sensory aversions to different foods, they have a limited number of safe foods. So trying to make improving diet quality as accessible as possible, like lowering the barrier of entry, ideally by like digging a trench and putting that bar in the trench. Because I think one of the challenges with the wellness community at large right now is they keep raising the bar, right? So here's the next you've done all of these different things that they're telling you to do, and then as soon as you feel like you have that down, there's the next more expensive food you're supposed to buy, or the next $300 a month supplement you're supposed to get, or the next, right, um, some kind of something you're supposed to avoid that you were relying on. And so by recentering the conversation on the most fundamental part of diet, which is nourishment, which is just nutrients, and understanding that it matters much more what types of foods you're eating in that sense rather than the quality of any one food. So there's a whole chapter dedicated to busting myths, some of which I used to believe, some of which I've always been on the right side of. So the whole book is really about improving diet quality without any restriction, while continuing to eat our favorite foods, while continuing to incorporate some ultra processed foods, some sugar, some dessert, because I think that the reason why the diet industry can persist is because every single diet sets us up to fail. There's also a section on the problems with weight loss diets, so it's a very weight inclusive book as well. Um, but even outside of weight loss as the goal, which I think is how most diets are um, like advertised to people, even outside of that, diets are not set up to be sustainable. And what matters for our long-term health is our long-term eating patterns. So Nutrivore is about centering that conversation around those long-term eating patterns and then helping people learn about nutritious foods and also start to move beyond their food fears.
Can I ask you a question? And I'm here. I am. I'm going to be my just super honest.
Yeah.
I have been vocal about not loving scoring systems when it
Mm.
comes to diet because it feels like we're setting things up to be good or bad. Okay. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
going to say one other thing. Just like recently, I reviewed, there was an app called, is it, I think, the Yuka app.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the whole thing is it scores foods and it, you know, as good or bad. I mean, that's a completely separate story because they do vilify things like, you know, additives and processed foods and non-organic foods. So that's a completely different story. But when I looked at the app, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, here I am. I'm about to dig into my yogurt and it says bad. You know, I just don't like that sort of categorization. So can we talk about the scoring system a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So, so I did create a scoring system, which I think is the first part to admit here. It's called the Nutrivore
Mm-hmm.
score, and it is a measurement of nutrient density, which is like scientifically defined as nutrients per calorie. The reason why I did that, my initial intent, actually, let's step back. Like, why did I feel like I needed a score? Like, why did I need a nutrient density score? Um, in the wellness community, there's a lot of buzzword talk around nutrient dense foods without having any objective way to measure that. And it's one of the things that the sort of nutrition world are kind of moving towards as well, at least since the early 2000s, is moving towards objective ways to measure nutrient density so that we have math to rely on. And I felt that if I was building a dietary philosophy that was going to center around nutrient density, it was really important to have a way to objectively say nutrient dense or not nutrient dense. And so I started when I sort of early on in my development of Nutrivore, I started with reading every paper I could get my hands on in the field of nutrient profiling. I spent 3 months, was all I did. And my initial intention was to figure out what the best nutrient density score was and adopt it. And I realized really quickly why none of those systems have been adopted yet by any institute or agency. And it's because they're not ready. So one of the things that's happening in nutrient profiling right now is a lot of trying to figure out which nutrients to include in a calculation to have a nutrient density score align with dietary guidelines. So like, okay, if we use these 9 nutrients or these 15 nutrients, which one fits with the healthy eating index better? And I think that's algorithmically the wrong way to go about it. I think it's more important to understand the food and then see how that might inform the next update to dietary guidelines. And so what I did in the absence of a scoring system that I could really get behind was basically the Nutrivore score is algorithmically identical to the Nutrient Rich Food Index, which is, I think, the most rigorous of those systems. But the Nutrient Rich Food Index typically uses 9 or 15 nutrients in the calculation, and the Nutrivore score uses 33. So it's like basically every nutrient that there was complete enough data that made sense to include in the calculation, other than sodium, because we don't need to be rewarding foods for having lots of sodium. Um, and I have used the Nutrivore score in the development of a lot of the practical resources that I create to help people get more nutrients from their diet. And I've created a lot of conversation around the score to hopefully stop people from using it to moralize foods. I say there's no cusp above which a food is good and below which a food is bad. And when you actually look at, I've got the scores calculated for almost 8,000 foods. When you just kind of lay it out on a 227-page spreadsheet, you scan down the scores. There's no line. There's no place where you can say, oh yeah, look, above here, this is good. Below here, it's bad. You can really mathematically, simplistically say that a food with a Nutrivore score above 150 contributes more nutrients than calories to the diet. But there are some really amazing whole foods with lower Nutrivore scores. It's like cheese, the most concentrated food source of calcium, typically averages 140, right? Apples, which are the dominant source of polyphenols in the average diet, most of them are around 130, 140. So I use it as a really fascinating lens through which to view food. And actually my preferred way to use it is for the redemption arcs for foods. It's for the foods that have the reputation for being nutritionally pointless that actually have valuable nutrition. Like iceberg lettuce is my favorite one to talk about, because it actually has slightly more nutrients per calorie than celery or cucumber or artichoke. It's like a third other lettuce varieties, but let's let it shine. Let's not compare it to other lettuce types. Mm-hmm. But it's the most accessible type of lettuce. It is the cheapest. It will last the longest in your fridge. It is the one that you'll be able to get in a Dollar General in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there are so many people who feel like, oh, it's just crunchy water. It's nutritional equivalent of cardboard. There's no point. And so that is how I like to use the Nutrivore score, is to show the value of a food. But yes, I absolutely agree with you that one of the big communication challenges that I have, and that I have been continuously trying to address for the last couple of years, is to make sure that we are not using this number A as the only way that we're choosing food, because it doesn't tell us what nutrients that food has. It doesn't tell us what nutrients per serving. It's really just a measure of the quality of the calories. Mm-hmm. So we really necessarily have to combine that number with other information we know about the food in our decision-making process. So helping people understand that. And then also being really clear. This doesn't mean a high score is a good food. This doesn't mean a low score is a bad food. This doesn't mean that we're going to use this number to moralize food. And in fact, like in my book, I've said this in 20 videos online. I say, if you find yourself using the score to rationalize moral judgments of foods, I want you to ignore the score. I want you to not look at it. I want you to not use this. Not all tools work for all people. And for those of us who are recovering from disordered eating patterns, yeah, it's not necessarily the best thing to exist. But I think because it's a mathematical formula and it's standardized across all foods, that it's a fascinating lens through which to view food. It's just not the only lens we want to use.
As a math brain, I love that. And that really resonates. I get it. And I think what's become clear to me through your explanation, reading parts of the book, looking very closely at the Nutrivore.com website, is that the score is actually a small piece of the of the whole picture here and the message that you're conveying. I think it's really quite fantastic. And as I understand it, the what's currently on the Nutrivore.com website is it's like 5% done, right? You're
Yes.
constantly researching and building it out. I obviously I looked at it and researched it ahead of this episode, and I was really struck by some things that were highlighted. And you made very clear to let people know that there's no one food that is bad. That message really came across. I loved that you include all citations, links to the articles and the studies. There was a section on, there were so many different things I was clicking and navigating, but you acknowledge, there are human studies, but also, animal studies, in vitro studies. Like, you really distinguish between types of research, because obviously that speaks to our ability to generalize to humans and, certain subpopulations. So I think that was great. I applaud you, Sarah, and I want to formally apologize to you for passing judgment and putting you in a bucket. None of us are perfect. We're all learning, we're all growing, we're all in a journey. There are things that I've said and done as a science communicator, but also just as a human being, that I'm not proud of, that I wouldn't say again. But I think what you're doing is incredible. I think it takes a lot of courage, actually, to again, I've said it multiple times, but to acknowledge things that we've said and done that maybe were mistakes or misguided. And I commend you, and I'm hoping, is there anything else that you wish people knew or that we haven't covered on this episode? Just want to give you an opportunity to speak your mind.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's clear based on how we sort of talked about my last 12 years of life, that my intentions were always to help people. And having been a large voice in the wellness community for a long time, I can say with near certainty that most of the people who are currently spreading misinformation, it is misinformation, not disinformation. They don't know what they're getting wrong, and they are trying to help. They really think that what they're saying is important, and it's an important message for people to hear. There are absolutely grifters. I want, for sure, there are grifters. But the majority of the people right now who are spreading misinformation mean well. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. I think from the outside looking in, it's really hard to know who's a grifter, who's just trying to help. And I think that, what we need right now is more people to go through a similar transition and sort of like awakening to what I did, and to be able to successfully bring the majority of their audience along like I was able to. And I think that the way that we do that is by creating a safe space for those influencers and creators, thought leaders, I guess we'll throw that bucket out there too, for them to also be uncomfortable in learning information that challenges their core beliefs, to be receptive to that information. It's hard enough to admit you're wrong to your spouse, let alone to a million people online. And my audience is small compared to a lot of these people. And so I think it's really important to be able to support that transition for people. It's very scary when your livelihood is wrapped up in your message and you realize your message is wrong. That's terrifying. That's terrifying, because that's not just you. Maybe you have employees, that's your family, that's everyone who is supported by your work. And so I think it's really important to, um, as science communicators on that side, to support wellness influencers making that transition. And I won't lie, it was a pretty bumpy road. But I hope that I've smoothed out some of those bumps for the people who will come after. I think that's the best service we can do to the general population right now, is to create that safe space for more people to be able to do that transition and, like me, find their way back to science.
I love that. That was so beautifully said. And really to those out there who might be science communicators or within the science community, there might be people who are upset that we even did this interview, Sarah. And personally, I think that says more about them than than it does about us. I think that science communicators and scientists, we need to be a little bit more understanding of people's journeys. We need to be patient and empathetic, understand that we're all fighting battles. We're all doing the best that we can in a tough tough world, right? It's not easy. And so again, Sarah, I just want to thank you so much for your vulnerability and your honesty. I think it's amazing work that you're doing. And yeah, can you let the audience know where they can follow you and get a copy of your book?
Yeah. So Nutrivore, the radical new science for getting the nutrients you need from the food you eat, drops May 14th. That's like almost here.
Yeah.
It's like, that's crazy. It's been like 2.5 years of work. And then it's like all of a sudden it's a real book in a real place. And that book lays out the entire like Nutrivore approach to food, again, kind of living somewhere between diet and anti-diet. And it's just really about improving diet quality in whatever ways are the most accessible to you, and kind of making those small iterative changes that add up to making a big difference in terms of long-term health outcomes. And then you can find me at home base is nutrivore.com. There's rabbit holes upon rabbit holes of information to fall into. And I'm really proud. I don't build it myself. I have a team that supports me in those articles, but we have more detailed articles about what nutrients do in the body than Linus Paulding Institute. And we have, that is the bar. But we are spending even more time digging into the research to really understand these nutrients and then be able to communicate in a way that it's accessible. We have detailed nutrition information about foods, fun facts about foods, more information about the Nutrivore philosophy. You can search the Nutrivore score database. If that will not be triggering for you, again, please ignore it if it will be. You can find the recommended dietary intake levels of nutrients broken down by demographic, which I cannot tell you how hard that was to track down all of that information. Why does that not all exist in one spot on the internet yet? Well, it does now, because it does at nutrivore.com. And again, we're adding new content to the website almost every day because I have an amazing team to support me in this. And on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, TikTok, YouTube, and Pinterest, I'm at Dr. Sarah Ballantyne.
Love it. Thank you again, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. This was a different episode, but I really loved it. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to have this candid conversation. As always, you can follow along at Unbiased SciPod across social media channels. Please leave us a review on Apple, on Spotify, all the places you tune into podcasts. It's always super helpful if you leave a review. You can subscribe to our free weekly newsletter at theunbiasedscipod.substack.com, although there is a paid option if you are able and willing to support our science communication efforts. Also, if you're interested, please check out my other podcast, Bites of Health. That's Bites with a Y. It's Bites of Health Pod on social media. Episodes air daily. They're 5 minutes long, and we answer commonly asked pediatric questions. So if you're a parent, you want to tune in. Thanks for tuning in for No Nonsense, Just Science.